Hello, everyone. I am the storyteller, and welcome to The Haunting Night. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax or fall asleep, so before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Before you drift off, let's begin. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from?
The old farmhouse had been abandoned for over 40 years, its weather-beaten frame leaning slightly as though the wind might finally convince it to collapse. Locals in the nearby town of Fair Hollow avoided it even during the day. Stories of screams in the night, flickering lights in windows with no power, and animals that refused to go near the property had earned it a dark reputation. Which is exactly why 19-year-old Daniel and his friends decided it would be the perfect place to film their horror vlog. They weren't amateurs. Their YouTube channel had just hit 100K subscribers, and they wanted something that would push them over the edge, something real. They didn't believe in ghosts, of course, just stories, legends, to exploit for clicks. They packed their cameras, night vision gear, EMF detectors they barely understood, and one old Ouija board for dramatic effect. There were 5 of them. Daniel, the ringleader, Jason, his cocky best friend, Emily, the skeptic, Leah, the quiet one who always sensed things before anyone else, and Max, the tech guy. They arrived just before sunset and set up camp in the overgrown front yard, filming intros and joking about haunted toilets and possessed chickens. When night fell, everything changed. The farmhouse was colder inside than it should have been. Every footstep echoed like it was being followed. As they explored, the flashlight beams danced across walls with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. Something about the place felt off. Not just abandoned, watched. They started hearing things by the time they reached the second floor. Soft thuds from the attic. A child's giggle echoing faintly from somewhere below. They chalked it up to creaky wood and wind until Leah stopped dead in the hallway. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The others listened. Nothing. Then, tap! Tap! Like fingernails on glass. It was coming from the room at the end of the hall. The nursery. Daniel pushed the door open slowly, camera rolling. The room was mostly empty, save for a single wooden rocking horse in the corner. It began to rock on its own. Everyone froze. "Wires?" Jason muttered, but Max shook his head. "Not ours." Then Leah pointed to the window. On the glass from the inside were 5 small handprints. Fresh, wet, like they'd just been pressed there. "I'm done," Emily said. "This isn't funny anymore." But Daniel convinced them to do one last thing, use the Ouija board in the living room. "Just for the finale," he begged. "One scene." Reluctantly, they agreed. They set up the cameras in a half circle and placed their fingers on the planchette. Jason laughed nervously. "If there's a ghost here, tell us your name." The planchette moved. They all looked at each other. "A-A-N." It spelled. Leah's face turned white. "Nathan Martin. That was the name of the boy who went missing here in the 70s. They say his mom went crazy and killed him." Silence. Jason tried to break the tension. "Well, Nathan, if you're here, give us a sign." All the lights went out. The cameras died, and the front door slammed shut. They scrambled to their feet. Max pulled out his phone for light, but the screen stayed black. Emily grabbed her bag to leave, only to find it missing. Jason tried opening a window, nailed shut. Then they heard it, a slow rhythmic creaking from upstairs, rocking. The horse. It was moving again. Daniel ran up with the backup camera. He reached the nursery and swung the door open, empty, until he panned to the corner. The horse rocked and something sat on it, a figure, small, pale, eyes dark and hollow. The child slowly turned toward him. "You let her out," it whispered. Daniel screamed and bolted back downstairs. "What did you see?" Leah asked. "It wasn't Nathan," he stammered. "It was something else." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. They rushed in to find the cabinets all open, dishes shattered on the floor, and on the wall, smeared in something dark, was a single word, "Mother." The room went icy cold. "We need to leave, now," Leah hissed. But when they turned to the door, it was gone. Not just locked, gone. In its place was a wall. Then the crying began. Low, mournful, coming from the attic. They didn't want to go, but some force dragged their feet forward. One by one, they climbed the narrow stairs to the attic door. It opened before they could touch it. Inside was a single rocking chair. and in it, a woman. Her face was gaunt, skin sagging like melted wax. Her eyes were completely white. She rocked slowly, clutching something in her arms, a bundle wrapped in a baby blanket, stained brown with old blood. She looked up. "You let him out," she said. "He was sleeping. Now you'll sleep too." The door slammed shut behind them. The footage ends there. That video was uploaded to their channel 3 days later. It now has over 12 million views. Nobody knows who uploaded it. Nobody has seen any of the 5 friends since. Their cars were still parked at the edge of the woods. Their tents still pitched. But the farmhouse burned to the ground the next night. No trace of fire accelerants, no signs of forced entry. Just ash. And a single child's handprint burned into a piece of glass found in the rubble. The storm rolled in faster than expected, washing the lonely stretch of highway in a curtain of rain. Eric was already late for his overnight shift at the truck depot, and the downpour only made things worse. He squinted through the windshield, wipers thudding rhythmically as thunder rumbled like distant growls. That's when he saw her. A girl, soaked to the bone, standing on the side of the road. No umbrella, no jacket. Just a pale white dress that clung to her skin like a second layer. Her head was down, hair plastered to her face. She didn't wave, she didn't move, just stood there like she'd been waiting. Eric hit the brakes. Something about her felt off, but he rolled the window down slightly. "You need a ride?" She nodded slowly without looking up. Reluctantly, he unlocked the door. She climbed in without a word, water pooling on the seat beneath her. Her skin looked almost gray in the dashboard light. She stared straight ahead, lips barely parted. No seatbelt. No thanks. Just silence. "Where you headed?" he asked, forcing casual. She turned to him, eyes wide, unblinking. "Home." Eric frowned. "Where's that?" She pointed straight ahead. It felt like a movie. The kind where the hitchhiker isn't what she seems, but Eric shook the thought off. Maybe she'd been in an accident. Maybe she was in shock. Still, the temperature in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment she entered. They drove in silence for 15 minutes before she spoke again. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Eric chuckled nervously. Not really? Should I?" She didn't respond. He glanced over. She was smiling, barely. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My sister says you're supposed to stay on the road," she whispered. "That the woods are hungry." Eric blinked. "What?" But when he looked again, her seat was empty. The car swerved. He hit the brakes and slid to a stop in the middle of the highway. Rain hammered the roof like fists. His heart pounded as he reached over to touch the seat. Wet. She had been there. He looked in the rearview mirror. The road was empty. No figure. No headlights behind him. Just trees and rain. Eric sat for a long minute, trying to calm his nerves. He considered calling someone, but who would believe him? Eventually, he pulled back onto the road. 10 more miles past, he rounded a curve and saw her again. Same dress, same pale skin, same bowed head, standing under the blinking yellow sign of a closed gas station. He didn't stop this time. Instead, he floored the accelerator. But as he looked in the mirror, her face appeared in the back seat. "You didn't listen," she said softly. He screamed and nearly lost control. When he looked again, she was gone. The rest of the drive to the depot was a blur. Eric didn't remember parking. He didn't remember clocking in. He just sat in the break room, staring at his reflection in the vending machine glass. He didn't tell anyone. The next night, he avoided that stretch of highway, took the long way around. Still, halfway through the trip, his headlights flickered. Then the radio crackled to life. No music, just static. And then her voice. "She's hungry again." Eric slammed the radio off. It came back on by itself. "You'll feed her." The power in the truck died. Everything shut off. Headlights, dashboard, engine. He coasted to a stop. Fog rolled in from the woods. That's when he saw the others. Figures standing in the trees. Dozens of them. Men, women, children, soaking wet, unmoving. Faces gray, hollow-eyed, all staring at him. The girl stepped forward. "She's always hungry." Eric locked the doors, but the truck lights flickered back on, and she was standing in front of the hood. She tilted her head. "You brought her home." Suddenly the windows cracked. Not shattered, cracked, all at once. From the inside, the girl's mouth widened into a black, gaping grin. Eric blacked out. He woke up in the middle of the road, alone. The truck was gone. His phone was dead. Not broken, drained, like something had fed on it. He walked until he found a gas station. The attendant looked startled when Eric stumbled in, soaked and shaking. "You all right, man?" Eric nodded weakly. "What happened to your truck?" Eric froze. "What do you mean?" "There was a wreck last night, right where the highway curves near the old service station. Burned up bad. Driver was charred to bones, said they found a girl's footprints around the wreck, barefoot." Eric's mouth went dry. "I didn't crash." The man blinked. "Buddy, your picture was on the news this morning. Said you died in that wreck." Eric slowly turned toward the store window. His reflection wasn't there. Only raindrops sliding down the glass. The Baxter family moved into the farmhouse on a cloudless summer morning. The realtor smiled a little too wide, hurried them through paperwork, and handed over the keys without making much eye contact. It was a steal for such a large property, secluded, spacious, and surrounded by dense woods. The place had charm, with its creaky floorboards and peeling wallpaper, a rustic feeling Julia and Mark found romantic. Their daughter Lila didn't share their excitement. "Someone's already here," she said, standing in the upstairs hallway the first night. "A boy. He watches from the attic." Mark laughed it off as childhood imagination. Lila was 5, and he figured she'd read too many ghost stories or picked up tales from cartoons. But later that night, as he and Julia lay in bed, they heard the soft dragging of footsteps across the ceiling, right above them, where the attic sat locked and unused. The next morning, Mark pulled down the old ladder and climbed into the attic. Dust coated every inch, and sunlight sliced through slats in the roof. Nothing seemed out of place, except one small detail. In the far corner, nestled in cobwebs, was a wooden rocking horse, worn and faded, rocking ever so slightly on its own. That night, Lila refused to sleep in her room. "He doesn't like my blanket," she whispered. "Says red makes him angry." Mark and Julia exchanged a glance. Lila's blanket was, indeed, bright red. Julia gently swapped it for a pale blue one and tucked her in. At 2:33 a.m., the smoke alarm went off. Julia bolted out of bed to find Lila's blanket smoldering in the living room fireplace, though no fire was lit. No one had been downstairs. They began to notice other strange things. Drawings appeared on the walls in crayon, dark stick figures with hollow eyes, always standing in the attic. Lila's toys rearranged themselves while she slept, lined up perfectly facing her bed. The dog refused to go upstairs and would bark violently toward the ceiling every evening at the same time. 3:14 a.m. One night, Julia heard giggling echo through the baby monitor, despite the fact Lila was sound asleep. When confronted, Lila was calm. "He just wants to play. He says his name is Thomas." Mark began researching the property's history. What he found sent a chill down his spine. In 1947, a boy named Thomas Green had lived in the house. He was 8 when he disappeared without a trace. The parents, accused of neglect, eventually vanished themselves. The house was sold and resold over the decades, usually within a year. Every owner left citing bad feelings or financial ruin. Some said the attic was cursed. They decided to burn the rocking horse. Mark dragged it outside, drenched it in gasoline, and lit the match. The flames engulfed the toy quickly, and Julia felt a brief wave of relief as it cracked and blackened. That night, Lila screamed so loudly the neighbors heard. They rushed to her room and found her curled in the corner, eyes wide, lips trembling. "He's angry now," she whispered. "He said that was his favorite." Then her bedroom window shattered inward. Glass flew like shrapnel across the room. No rocks, no hail, no storm. Just a blast of icy air and a presence that made Julia's skin crawl. They left the house the next day, staying at a motel while deciding their next move. Lila wouldn't speak. She just stared at her hands as if waiting for them to move without her permission. Mark suggested seeing a child psychologist. But then the house called, literally. Julia's phone buzzed with a call from their landline. It was impossible. No one was there. She answered. Static. And beneath the static, a voice faint, childlike. "Come back. I'm not done playing." Click. They contacted a paranormal investigator. He came with equipment, EMF meters, thermal cameras, voice recorders. Julia and Mark watched from outside as he climbed into the attic. 30 minutes passed. Then the attic window lit up. The investigator stumbled out of the house, face pale, hands trembling. "There's something in that attic," he said, something that was never human. He played back a recording. Amid the crackling static was a voice, raspy, distorted. "She's mine now. You left her. That means she's mine." Julia and Mark ran to the motel. Lila was gone. The manager claimed she had walked out alone, smiling, barefoot. Security footage showed her stepping into the woods behind the building. They searched for days. Volunteers combed the forests. Nothing. Weeks turned into months. The case went cold. Julia and Mark split up under the weight of grief and guilt. She moved to another state. Mark, broken and hollow, stayed behind, haunted by the memory of Lila's last smile. A year later, a new family bought the farmhouse. Their 6-year-old son was ecstatic to explore the big attic. "Do you like it up here?" his mother asked, watching him sit on the floor, staring into the shadows. He nodded slowly. "There's a girl here," he said. "She doesn't talk much, but she plays with me." The mother smiled. "What's her name?" He turned to her, face blank. "Leela, but she says she has a new name now." "What's that?" He looked toward the darkest corner of the attic. "Mother." They say when someone dies suddenly, especially in a place not meant for death, a part of them stays behind. Trapped, confused, angry. That's what the townsfolk of Red Hollow whispered about the Hartley Public Library. A grand old building of red brick and towering arched windows built in the late 1800s, it was beautiful from the outside. But inside, the air was always just a little too cold, and the silence never felt peaceful. It felt watched. Emily had never believed in ghost stories. A recent graduate with a degree in library sciences, she saw the position at Red Hollow as a temporary gig. Resume filler until she could land a real job in the city. She laughed at the rumors, even when the head librarian handed her a small iron bell on her first day. "In case you ever hear footsteps on the 3rd floor," the woman said, not meeting Emily's eyes. "Just ring this. Once." Emily assumed it was just town superstition. But she still kept the bell in her pocket. Her duties were simple. Catalog returned books, restock shelves, and lock up each night. The only real rule was never to use the 3rd floor reading room after dark. Historic preservation, the staff said. Weak floorboards. But even during the day, that room felt off. No windows, just one long table in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. And in the far corner, an old portrait of a stern-faced woman in a black dress. No nameplate, no artist's signature. Just those pale, angry eyes that followed you no matter where you stood. On her 3rd week, Emily worked late, reorganizing the archives in the basement after a minor flood. By the time she returned upstairs, the sun had dipped behind the trees and the library lights buzzed overhead like insects. She gathered her things, did her final sweep, and was just locking the front door when she heard it. Footsteps. Above her. Heavy. Deliberate. Crossing the 3rd floor. She froze. Everyone had left. She was sure of it. "Hello?" she called out, heart already racing. Silence. She waited, holding her breath. Then, another step, then 2 more. Crossing directly above her head, she pulled out her phone, dialing the head librarian. No signal. With trembling fingers, she reached into her coat pocket and took out the bell. She stared at it. This was ridiculous. But when the footsteps began again, faster this time, circling above her, she rang it. The sound echoed, sharp and unnatural in the silent library. Everything stopped. No footsteps, no creaks, nothing. She stood frozen, ears straining. Then behind her she heard a slow creak, a door opening. She turned toward the staircase. The 3rd floor door, which had been locked for years, was open. Dim yellow light spilled out from within. Emily should have left. She should have run. But curiosity, or something darker, pulled her toward the stairs. She climbed slowly, each step screaming under her weight. At the top, she paused, gripping the railing. The reading room looked different. Clean, polished. The portrait was gone, and the table, now set for tea. Porcelain cups, silver spoons, fresh scones on delicate plates. And in one of the chairs, facing away from her, sat a figure in a black dress. Emily tried to speak, but her voice caught. "Come sit," the figure said, her voice like ice on bare skin. Emily's legs moved without permission. She sat. The woman turned slowly, the same face from the portrait. Pale, hollow-eyed, unblinking. "You rang the bell," she said. "That means you're staying." Emily tried to stand. Her body didn't respond. "I've been so very lonely," the woman continued. "They all leave, but not you, not now." Emily's breath came shallow. "Please, let me go." The woman's smile was sharp. "You came willingly. That means I can keep your voice." She reached across the table and placed her cold hand over Emily's throat. A burning sensation crawled up her neck. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then, Darkness. When Emily woke, she was lying on the floor of the reading room. Everything was dusty again. The portrait was back on the wall. The tea set was gone. She stumbled downstairs, throat raw, and tried to scream. Nothing. Her voice was gone. She drove home in silence, trembling. Doctors couldn't explain it. Psychological trauma, they guessed. Stress-induced aphonia. She tried to write down what happened, but every time she attempted it, the words faded on the page. Eventually, she stopped trying. She moved back to the city, started over, found work managing a digital archive. Silent, withdrawn, but alive. Years passed. Then one day, a young man came to her desk, a reporter, investigating the Hartley Library's history. "Strangest thing," he said. "All records of the original reading room staff from the 1900s? Gone, except one. A woman named Emily Carter vanished in 2023. Says she was last seen entering the third floor." Emily froze. That wasn't her last name. Not yet. The photo he placed on her desk showed her face, older, worn, lifeless, framed on the wall of the reading room. She hadn't escaped. She had replaced her. And somewhere back in that cursed library, someone new was about to ring the bell. Everyone in the city had a story about apartment 313 in the Bellevue Tower. Some claimed it was cursed. Others swore it never existed at all. The strange part? No two people remembered the same thing about it. Different layouts, different furniture, even different windows. But one detail always stayed the same. No one who entered apartment 313 ever came out the same. Some didn't come out at all. Maya was a junior crime journalist, desperate for a breakout story. When she stumbled upon a thread on an obscure online forum filled with first-person accounts of terrifying experiences tied to 313, she thought she'd found her chance. Missing persons, urban legends, paranormal reports, all in the same location. She rented apartment 312, the unit right next door. The first night was quiet, too quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no creaks from the unit next door. She knocked on the wall. No reply. She left a glass on the floor, pressed to the wall, listening. Nothing. But at exactly 3:13 a.m., she heard the knock. 3 slow taps. Deliberate. From inside apartment 3113. She stared at the wall, heart pounding. Another knock. She grabbed her recorder and whispered, "Are you real?" Silence. Then something dragged across the floor, like a chair scraping wood. Maya barely slept. The next day, she asked the landlord about the unit. "There is no 313, he said, not looking up from his clipboard. She pointed to the door. "It's right there." "No, it's not," he said and walked away. That night, the knocking came again. This time, it didn't stop. At 3:17 a.m., the door to apartment 313 creaked open. She stared at it from her peephole. No one came out. No one went in. The door just hung there, open. She stepped out, phone flashlight in hand, and approached the door. Inside was darkness, and something colder than the hallway air. Her breath fogged instantly. "Maya," a voice whispered from inside. She froze. No one knew she was staying there. No one. The voice came again, from deeper in the room. "Help me." She should have run, but her instincts kicked in. This could be the story. She stepped in. The door slammed shut behind her. She turned, no knob on the inside, just a flat, featureless wall. The room was wrong. Too long. The ceiling too high. It felt stretched, distorted. The windows showed nothing but black fog. No city skyline. No lights. As she stepped forward, the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. She saw a figure in the corner. It was a man, or what had once been a man. Emaciated, pale, eyes sunken, skin stretched over sharp bone. He stared at her with a look of absolute despair. "Don't talk to it," he whispered. "What?" "The apartment. Don't answer it. Don't believe it. Don't speak your name again. If you do, it knows you." Suddenly, the room began to change. The wallpaper peeled back in long, wet strips. The carpet writhed with movement, hundreds of thin, finger-like things burrowing beneath it. Maya stumbled backward, screaming. The man screamed too, but not at her. He pointed to the ceiling. Something was descending. Not a creature, the room itself. The ceiling bent like melted plastic, folding down to meet her. A mouth opened, no lips, just a jagged split with hundreds of human teeth, right above her head. "Say your name," the voice commanded. She clamped her mouth shut. The man began sobbing. "You'll never leave unless you do," he whispered. "Don't lie to her," said a second voice. It came from the floor this time. The carpet split, revealing an eye. Huge, bloodshot, blinking slowly. "Say it," the voice repeated. "Say your name, and you can go home." Maya trembled. "Maya," she whispered before she could stop herself. The eye rolled back, the ceiling mouth smiled, and the world split. The next thing she knew, she was standing outside apartment 313 again. Door shut. Locked. Everything normal. She checked her phone. It was morning, April 4th, except it had been April 1st when she went inside. 3 days had passed. She rushed downstairs and confronted the landlord. "What happened to apartment 313? I was in there." The landlord blinked. "Apartment 313 burned down in 1998. Gas explosion. No one's been inside since." He walked away. Maya rushed back up to 312, heart pounding. She grabbed her laptop and camera. All her recordings were gone. Her notebook was blank. No audio, no video, nothing but a sticky note on her desk, in her own handwriting. "Don't tell anyone. Ever." She stared at it for a long time. But of course, she did tell someone. Her editor. She told him everything. The next morning, her editor was found dead in his apartment. Mouth torn open, eyes missing. And taped to his chest, a single sticky note. She told. Terrified, Maya packed her things, left the city, changed her number. But it didn't matter. The knocking followed her. No matter where she went, always at 3:13 a.m. And sometimes when she blinked too long or turned too fast, she'd see it. Her old apartment door, standing open, waiting. When Malik transferred to the remote village of Kora as part of a field research assignment for his anthropology degree, he wasn't thrilled. It was the kind of place you couldn't find on most maps. One unpaved road in, dense forest all around, and barely any signal. The villagers were quiet, suspicious of outsiders, and unnervingly traditional. He'd only planned to stay for a week, document a few rituals, maybe interview the elders about folklore. But something about Kora felt stuck in time. Not quaint, not peaceful, just wrong. His first few nights were uneventful, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The old guest house they gave him had no mirrors, no locks on the doors, and a distinct smell of damp earth. Every morning he'd find dirt on the floor near his bed. Just a handful. Always fresh. He asked about it. The old caretaker, Bibi Zarina, gave a dismissive laugh and said, "The soil here never rests. It moves where it wants." He assumed it was just superstition. Or rats. Then he heard the chanting. It was the fourth night. Somewhere between midnight and 1, a low, guttural rhythm echoed through the trees. Not loud, just persistent. Like dozens of people whispering the same phrase again and again in a language he didn't understand. When he looked out the window, he saw them. Figures, cloaked in black, walking slowly through the forest, toward the center of the village. He grabbed his recorder, threw on a jacket, and followed at a distance. They formed a circle in front of a giant tree behind the village. A tree with bark so black it looked charred, and roots that seemed to twitch when touched by moonlight. In the center of the circle was a child, maybe 8 years old, eyes closed, hands tied. No one noticed him. The chanting grew louder, and then silence. One of the cloaked figures stepped forward with a knife carved from bone. Malik stumbled backward in shock, snapping a branch beneath his feet. Every hooded head turned. He ran. Branches lashed at his face. He didn't stop until he was back at the guest house, heart hammering, lungs burning. He locked the door with a chair, though it felt useless. Sleep was impossible. The next morning, the village was calm. Children played, women cooked, men repaired fishing nets. The tree didn't exist anymore. Not even a stump. When Malik asked about it, the villagers acted confused. What tree? What chanting? Even Bibi Zarina just smiled and offered him tea. He decided to leave early. That night, he packed his things. But when he tried to leave, his motorbike was gone. No one had seen it. He walked to the only road out and found it blocked by trees that hadn't been there before. Not fallen trees, standing, growing, like the forest had rearranged itself. That night, the dirt pile by his bed was larger, and something else had been added. A finger bone. Polished. Clean. He didn't sleep. He watched the door until morning. He tried the radio. No signal. The power went out just after sunset. He lit a candle and sat in the corner with a knife. Then came the knock. Soft, deliberate, right on the wood of his door. He held his breath. Another knock, and a voice. A child's voice. "Help me." The same child from the ritual. He opened the door. Yet no one was there. But muddy footprints led away from the door. Small, bare feet heading toward the woods. He followed, lantern in hand, adrenaline replacing fear. The footprint stopped at the black tree. Somehow it was back. Larger than before. Its bark pulsing like veins. Its roots stretching toward him. The child stood by the trunk, staring at him. "I didn't want to," she whispered. "They made me." "Who?" Malik asked, his voice shaking. She pointed upward. Dozens of cloaked figures stood in the trees, limbs twisted in impossible ways, faces hidden, watching. "She didn't scream," said a voice behind him. He turned. Bibi Zarina stood there, her eyes entirely white. None of them scream anymore. Before he could run, the roots snared his ankles, dragging him toward the base of the tree. "We feed it," she said. "It keeps us alive." He screamed as bark peeled open like lips, revealing rows of splintered wooden teeth. Darkness swallowed him whole. Weeks later, a new traveler arrived in Kora, an eager journalist chasing ghost stories and missing persons. He asked about Malik. The villagers said no one by that name had come. He asked about the black tree. The villagers smiled and said there were no such trees here. But the guest house stood open, and inside the journalist found a clean room with freshly made sheets and a single polished bone placed gently on the pillow. When he turned to ask the caretaker about it, Bibi Zarina just smiled. "Welcome," she said. "You must be tired. Rest now. The soil will keep you safe." The town of Bramblewood hadn't had a proper storm in over a year, until the night the cemetery split open. It started with the thunder, long, groaning rumbles that echoed like growls beneath the earth. Rain followed fast, slicing through the air in sheets. Most people stayed inside, windows shuttered, lights dimmed. But not everyone. Dennis Lyle, the town's gravedigger for nearly 40 years, was out at Hollow Pine Cemetery with a lantern and a bottle of whiskey. He was checking the perimeter, as he did every Friday. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't even believe in God. But he believed in the dead staying buried, and tonight, something was trying to change that. At 12:17 a.m., the first coffin clawed its way to the surface. Dennis saw the ground heave like breath, saw the soil tremble and crack, then split wide. From the grave of Emmett Charters, a man who died in 1963, came the sound of scraping wood and muffled banging. Dennis dropped his lantern, and then the fingers appeared. Rotting, discolored fingers clawing out of the soil. Nails cracked and blackened. They gripped the edges of the grave, and slowly Emmett's head emerged. Hollow eye sockets, mouth open in a scream that made no sound. Dennis ran. He didn't stop until he got back to his truck. He left the cemetery gates swinging in the wind. By morning, no one believed his story. Not until the photos showed up. Someone, no one knows who, slipped a manila envelope under the sheriff's office door. Inside were 10 black and white photos of the cemetery. Half a dozen graves torn open, coffins split like dry wood, and something crawling out of one of them. The town went into a quiet panic. Hollow Pines was sealed off. The church held emergency prayer sessions. And Dennis disappeared 3 days later. His truck was found abandoned near the cemetery. The driver's seat was soaked in blood. That's when the dream started. Dozens of Bramblewood residents reported the same dream. Standing in the cemetery at night, rain falling around them, thunder growling. They'd see open graves. Sometimes they'd see themselves in one. Alive, screaming, being buried by shadowy figures. Always the same figures, tall, thin, with stitched mouths and no eyes. One man, Marcus Bell, woke up screaming and gouged out his own eyes with a fork before paramedics arrived. He survived, but never spoke again. The town tried to move on. The graves were resealed. The church held a blessing ceremony. A new gravedigger, Carla, was hired. Young, skeptical, and determined not to fall for small-town hysteria. Her first week was quiet, until she saw the girl. It was just after dusk, and Carla was doing a final check near the north edge of the cemetery, where the oldest graves were, some dating back to the 1800s. That's where she spotted the little girl standing near a tombstone. White dress, no shoes, head tilted. Carla called out to her. The girl looked up, and her eyes, black pits with no whites, no pupils, locked onto hers. Then she opened her mouth, so wide, wider than humanly possible, and screamed. But no sound came out. Carla stumbled backward, dropped her flashlight, and when she looked back up, the girl was gone. That night, Carla dreamed of standing in an open grave, soil raining down on her as stitched-faced figures whispered in a language she didn't know. When she woke up, dirt was under her fingernails and in her hair. She quit the next day. The town started losing people after that. One by one. Not murdered, Not kidnapped, just gone. Their houses were left unlocked, food still cooking on the stove, pets unfed. Over 24 people in 2 months. No answers, just rumors. Some said the dead were angry, that the storm had opened something buried long before Hollow Pines was ever a cemetery. A place once used for ritual burials, sacrifices. Some claimed to hear chanting in the woods beyond the graveyard, voices in a dead language carried on the wind. Others said the graves weren't just letting things out, they were pulling people in. Sheriff Dalton, a hardened man with no patience for myths, finally snapped after losing his son, Timmy, who vanished after walking his dog near the cemetery fence. The sheriff went to the cemetery at sunset with a shotgun and gasoline. He poured fuel over the graves, muttering to himself, screaming at shadows. He set the place on fire, or tried to. The fire wouldn't catch, not even with dry leaves and kerosene. The wind howled louder. The ground shook, and the graves, dozens of them, began opening all at once. That's when the sheriff's radio crackled. Through the static came a child's voice. "Daddy, I'm cold." It was Timmy, sobbing, begging for help. The sheriff fell to his knees, dropped the shotgun, and walked toward the nearest open grave. He never came back out. The town of Bramblewood is mostly abandoned now, a ghost town in every sense. The cemetery is overgrown, choked by ivy and mist. No one dares go near it. But if you drive past on a stormy night, you might hear the thunder rumble. You might see figures moving between the tombstones. And if you listen closely, very closely, you might hear your name being whispered from beneath the soil. It started with a missing dog. Old Man Harrow lived 3 houses down from Emily and her parents. He was one of those shut-in types, grumpy, quiet, eyes always watching from behind dusty curtains. People said he'd once been a butcher, but no one really knew. What they did know was that he lived alone, never had guests, and never smiled. When Emily's golden retriever Max vanished one rainy Thursday evening, she knew something was wrong. Max never ran off. He was old, slow, and loyal. Always came back when called. But that night, he didn't return from the yard. They searched the neighborhood with flashlights, calling his name until their voices were hoarse. Nothing. Just the sound of wet leaves crunching under their boots and the hiss of wind through the trees. Emily swore she heard barking at one point, faint, like it was coming from underground, but her parents brushed it off as her imagination. The next day, she noticed something odd. A smear of red on Harrow's back porch. It looked like blood. Fresh. Like someone had tried to clean it, but gave up halfway. She told her dad, who just sighed and said Harrow probably cut himself or something. "Don't go near his house," he warned. "The man's not right in the head." But Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, she snuck out. She waited until her parents were asleep, slipped on her hoodie, and took Max's old leash with her. Just in case. Rain had started to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, soaking through her shoes as she made her way to Harrow's property. His house loomed in the dark like something forgotten by time. The yard was overgrown, bushes twisted like gnarled hands. Windows glared like hollow eyes. Emily's heart pounded so hard she was sure he'd hear it. But the house was silent. She crept around to the backyard, where she'd seen the blood. The porch creaked under her weight, but no lights turned on. She crouched, inspecting the dark stain. It was still wet. That's when she heard it. A low, whimpering sound, like a dog, muffled, coming from beneath the porch. There was a small hatch partially hidden by dead leaves, rusted shut at the edges but with a handle. Emily hesitated, then pulled. It groaned open, revealing a narrow, dirt tunnel descending into darkness. The smell hit her first. Rot. Copper. Old meat. She gagged but climbed down, using her phone's flashlight to guide the way. The tunnel was tight, damp walls pressing in. The barking grew louder, frantic now. And then she found the door. A thick metal slab embedded into the earth. The kind you see in slaughterhouses. It had a sliding peephole, smeared with something she didn't want to identify. Emily tried the handle. It opened. What lay beyond wasn't a basement. It was a butcher's chamber. Chains hung from the ceiling. Hooks. A large wooden table stained black with age and use. Shelves lined with jars, some containing animal parts. Others weren't so easy to identify. Max was there, caged in the corner, whimpering, fur matted with blood that didn't seem to be his. Emily rushed to him, sobbing with relief, fumbling with the cage lock. But as she struggled, something behind her clicked. The door had closed, and she wasn't alone. Old Man Harrow stepped from the shadows. He wasn't surprised to see her. In fact, he looked almost pleased. I was wondering how long it would take someone to come looking. His voice was calm. Too calm, like he was discussing the weather. Emily backed away, clutching Max. Her flashlight shook in her hand, the beam trembling across the room. Harrow smiled, revealing yellowed teeth and a glint of metal behind his lower lip. Something embedded there. A hook? Used to be just the dogs, he continued. Then the cats, but they weren't enough. Not anymore. You'd be amazed how fast it escalates. What you start doing out of curiosity becomes habit. Emily screamed. She grabbed the nearest object, a glass jar, and hurled it at him. It shattered, slicing across his cheek. He staggered but didn't fall. She snatched a rusty bone saw from the table and swung. This time, he fell. She didn't wait to see if he'd stay down. She unlocked Max's cage and ran, dragging him behind her through the tunnel. Up the hatch, into the rain. When she burst into her house, she was covered in mud and blood, shaking so hard she could barely speak. Her parents called the cops. They didn't believe her at first, not until they found the tunnel. Not until they found what Harrow had buried in his backyard. Bones. Dozens of them. Some animal, some not. He was arrested, but something was off. He didn't resist, just smiled as they cuffed him, whistled an old nursery rhyme the entire ride to the station. And that night, Max went missing again. The doors were locked, windows shut, but he was gone. Emily checked the yard, the street, even the woods. She found him the next morning, hanging from a tree, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut, a note pinned to his collar. You opened the door, now you can't close it. After that, the dreams started, of chains, of hooks, of cold, blood-slick walls. Every night, the same, and every morning something new was dead in their neighborhood. Birds, squirrels, a neighbor's cat. Then a kid went missing. Then another. People started whispering about curses, about haunted ground. But Emily knew the truth. Old Man Harrow was still in jail, but something else had been waiting in that tunnel, something that had used him. And now that the door had been opened again, it didn't need him anymore. The motel sat just off Route 17, far enough from town that most people passed it without a second glance. A faded vacancy sign flickered erratically in the window, like it was struggling to stay alive. The paint on the exterior had long since peeled away, and the smell of mildew hung thick in the air. The kind of place you check into when you're desperate, not when you have choices. Jake didn't have choices. He'd been driving for 13 hours straight, his car filled with boxes, leftover food containers, and the lingering tension of a failed relationship. He wasn't running from anything, or at least that's what he told himself. He just needed distance. A break from the noise of the city. Somewhere quiet to think. The receptionist didn't ask questions. She handed him a rusty key with a plastic tag that read Room 6, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her fingers were long, too long, and her skin had a strange, paper-dry texture that Jake noticed when their hands briefly touched. Just one night, he muttered. She didn't respond. The hallway was dim, the carpet soaked in years of grime. The door to Room 6 stuck before it gave way with a loud creak. Inside, the room was as expected. Outdated, stained wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and a TV bolted to the dresser with missing buttons. Jake tossed his bag on the bed and let out a long breath. He told himself he was too tired to care. But even then, something felt wrong. The air was too still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. And the mirror over the sink had smudges that looked like fingerprints, despite the room supposedly being cleaned. He ignored it, took a quick shower, ate a sandwich, tried watching the TV, but only static played on every channel. That night, he dreamt of knocking. Not from the door, but from inside the walls. A rhythmic, almost polite tapping. He didn't wake up scared. He woke up confused. The room was colder than it had been. His breath fogged slightly in the air, and the clock on the nightstand blinked 3:11 a.m., frozen. He stood up, rubbed his arms, and heard it again. Knock. 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 This time from the closet. It didn't make sense. The closet was small, empty. He'd checked it earlier. But now, the door stood slightly ajar, and the knocking came again, softer, like fingernails brushing against wood. He stepped toward it slowly, every instinct in his body telling him not to. But Jake had always been the kind of person who needed proof. Needed to see the monster under the bed before he believed in it. He flung the door open. Empty. He let out a shaky laugh, turned to go back to bed, and stopped cold. There was a figure in the mirror. Not his reflection. Standing behind him. Tall. Thin. A face half in shadow, half in some grotesque smile that stretched far too wide. Its eyes were sunken holes, and something dripped from its fingertips. Black and thick like tar. Jake spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. Silent again. But when he looked back at the mirror, it was cracked. A single jagged fracture running down the center. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the crack was gone. The receptionist was gone too. Jake banged on the counter, looked around, but no one answered. No cars in the lot except his. No other guests. The air smelled worse now, like something rotting behind the walls. He should have left then. Packed his stuff and driven until the motel was just a speck in the rearview mirror. But he didn't. Something held him there. Curiosity, or maybe something darker. He stayed another night. The knocking began earlier this time. And it wasn't just the closet. It came from the floorboards, from the walls, from the ceiling. Knock, knock, knock. Always 3 times, always slow. And then came the voice. Faint, garbled, like a cassette tape playing underwater. You see it now, don't you? Jake sat frozen on the edge of the bed. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. You let it in. The mirror shattered. No impact, no reason. Just exploded, spider webbing out from the center like something had punched it from the other side. Jake backed away, blood running cold. From the shards, the figure emerged. Not a reflection anymore. It crawled out of the glass slowly as though pulling itself from another world. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending the wrong way. No eyes, just black holes where they should be. Its smile never moved, but its voice echoed in Jake's mind. You were the key. Jake ran. Out of the room, down the hallway, into the lobby, empty. He grabbed his keys and burst into the parking lot. His car wouldn't start. No click, no engine noise, just silence. Behind him, all the motel doors creaked open in unison. Every single one. Figures stood in each doorway, each of them wearing the same grotesque smile. All tall, all faceless, all dripping that same inky substance onto the ground. Jake screamed. He ran into the woods behind the motel, branches tearing at his clothes, his lungs burning with cold night air. He didn't stop until the sun began to rise. When he finally looked back, there was no motel. Just a dirt road. An empty clearing, like it had never been there. Jake tried reporting it. The police found nothing, no building, no foundation, nothing on the maps. They told him he'd had a breakdown. Stress, isolation, too much caffeine, maybe even drugs. But Jake knows what he saw. He knows what followed him. Because now, every night at 3:11 a.m., no matter where he is, the knocking returns, always 3 times. Always from somewhere too close. And in every mirror he passes, he sees a crack starting to form, waiting for him to stop watching, just long enough for it to come through again. The town of Ash Hollow had a reputation, whispered among neighboring townsfolk and spread in the form of ghost stories at summer camps and sleepovers. Nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, Ash Hollow had been abandoned since the 1980s, after its residents vanished, all of them. Houses left unlocked, meals half-eaten, TVs still humming static. No bodies, no blood, just emptiness. Like they evaporated into the mist. It was called The Vanishing, and it was never explained. Urban explorers came and went over the years, some returning with stories of strange sights and feelings of dread, others never coming back at all. But for Sam, a freelance documentarian obsessed with unsolved mysteries, it was the perfect place for his next project. He wanted truth. Closure. Something that would finally make people see his work. What better than the most infamous ghost town in the eastern U.S.? Sam arrived on a gray October morning with his camera gear, drone, sleeping bag, and rations to last a week. He told no one he was going, just in case someone tried to talk him out of it. The main road into Ash Hollow had been blocked off years ago, so he hiked the last 2 miles, his boots crunching along gravel choked by overgrowth. When he arrived, the air felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. Even the insects kept their distance. The houses were weather-beaten, but mostly intact. Children's toys littered the yards, now faded and cracked. A swing moved slowly in the windless air. The school bell, rusted and green with time, hung eerily still. Sam filmed everything. He set up camp in the old police station. barricaded the doors just in case, though he didn't know why. Rationally, he expected nothing. But still, there was a weight in the air that pressed against his lungs. That first night, he heard footsteps, not wildlife, human, heavy, deliberate, walking on pavement. When he peeked through the blinds, the street was empty. But he still heard the footsteps, closer, then circling the building. He held his breath for what felt like hours. In the morning, he found footprints in the dust. Bare feet, dozens of them, all around the building. He thought of leaving. He should have. But his camera caught the prints, and part of him just a bit felt thrilled. He stayed. Each night, the footsteps returned, but they weren't alone anymore. Children's laughter, whispers in guttural tones. Once, just before dawn, he swore he saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest. A tall silhouette, unnaturally thin, with arms that hung too low, and a head cocked at an inhuman angle. He ran outside with the camera, but the figure was gone. Only a deep impression in the grass where something had stood. On the third day, things changed. His recordings began to warp. Footage corrupted in ways he couldn't explain. Faces appeared in windows that hadn't been there while filming. Reflections that didn't match reality. In one clip, as he walked down a street, something followed him in the shadows. Frame by frame, it got closer. But he never saw it in real time. That night, he had a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. He was in the school, the bell tolling endlessly. Children stood in the hallways, faces blurred like smeared paint. They whispered in unison, "He's here." He turned around, and there stood a woman. Or what used to be a woman. Her mouth was a torn wound sewn at the corners. Her eyes were missing, but she still stared. Her fingers were blackened stubs, twitching violently. When he woke up, his camera was gone, his laptop, drone, everything. Just gone. Except for one thing, a VHS tape. It hadn't been there before. It sat on the desk, dusty but labeled in fresh ink. Play me. There were no TVs, no VCRs. But in the basement of the police station, he found one. Plugged in, working. He pressed play. The footage showed him, sleeping, filmed from inches away. The camera panned over his face, paused on his neck, then shifted to something behind him. A shadow, moving unnaturally. Then it cut to black. White text appeared. "He's here." The tape ejected on its own. Something banged upstairs. He ran, out of the station, into the woods. But the forest never ended. He walked for hours, then days, food gone, batteries dead. He came across the same landmarks. The school, the diner, the gas station. He was looping, until finally he found the road. Asphalt cracked, weeds breaking through. A sign, "Thank you for visiting Ash Hollow." He was out, somehow. He stumbled to a nearby town, half mad and starving. People helped him. The police listened to his story, skeptical but concerned. They took his statement, took him to a hospital, and kept him for observation. That was 3 weeks ago. He recovered. Then, last night, he received a package at his hotel. No return address. Inside, a VHS tape. He almost threw it out. But curiosity, that same dangerous curiosity, won again. He found an old VCR at a pawn shop and watched the tape. It showed him, sleeping in his hospital bed, and something moving under the sheets. The camera panned slowly, revealing his face. But his mouth was sewn shut. The screen went black. Then a final whisper. He never left. In the remote village of Vorthen, nestled deep within the Carpathian Mountains, there stood a house that no one dared speak of by name. Locals only referred to it as the Whispering House. It had been abandoned for nearly 80 years, yet every night, without fail, lights flickered behind its cracked windows, and faint murmurs could be heard if you passed by at exactly 2:44 a.m. Elias Trenko, a former investigative journalist turned podcaster, stumbled across the legend while researching forgotten European ghost stories. His interest peaked when he read a police report from 1947, detailing how the entire Grooven family, 7 people, vanished without a trace inside that very house, with no signs of forced entry or escape. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just 7 dinner plates on the table, still warm. Elias wasn't the kind to believe in ghosts. He believed in facts, patterns, and the human tendency for fear-fueled exaggeration. But he also knew a good story when he saw one, and he was desperate for a viral episode. He arrived in Vorthen in November, just as the first snow began to fall. The villagers were wary. An old woman named Dahlia approached him outside a tavern, gripped his arm tightly, and whispered, "They don't whisper to you. They whisper through you." He laughed it off. but he would remember those words later. The house stood at the edge of a pine forest, its wood blackened by time, windows fogged from within. The front door was open, swinging gently, as if waiting. Elias set up 3 cameras, one in the main hallway, one in the dining room, and one upstairs near the bedrooms. He placed an audio recorder in the basement, which he believed was the origin point of the whispers, based on stories from old witness statements. He locked himself inside just before midnight. The air was bitterly cold, colder than outside. His breath formed clouds even with his heavy coat. The house groaned as though it were breathing, and every board creaked like a voice about to speak. At 2:43 a.m., he sat in the living room, camera rolling. Then the whispers began. Not soft or hushed, but layered, like a crowd talking all at once in a low chant. Some voices sounded human, others didn't. He followed the sound to the basement. His flashlight flickered as he descended the narrow stairs. The basement was lined with mirrors, old, ornate, covered in dust. But one mirror at the far end was clean, almost glowing. He approached it cautiously, recorder in hand. That's when he saw it. His reflection was smiling, but he wasn't. He stepped back. The smile in the mirror widened. Then it spoke. "We remember your voice, Elias." He dropped the recorder. "You told your mother the fire was an accident." His knees buckled. He hadn't spoken of that fire in 15 years. No one knew. No one should know. "You said she fell asleep with the candle burning." He ran upstairs, heart racing, breath shallow. The whispers followed. Not in the air, but inside his head. By morning, the cameras had all stopped recording. The audio file in the basement was corrupted, except for one clear phrase. The house doesn't trap people, it keeps their truths. Elias tried to leave the village that morning, but his car wouldn't start. When the mechanic checked the engine, he found it completely melted from the inside, like it had been exposed to intense heat. A freak accident, they said. Elias never aired the episode. Instead, he left Vorthen on foot the next day, walking 12 miles to the nearest bus station. He deleted all footage and burned his notes, or so he thought. 2 months later, a new episode appeared on his podcast channel, one he didn't upload. It was titled Inside the Whispering House. It featured raw audio, Elias talking to someone in the basement, revealing secrets he'd never shared, not even in therapy. His voice trembled as he confessed to letting his mother die in the fire, his twisted childhood experiments on stray animals, and the accident that left a fellow journalist paralyzed, an accident he caused. The episode went viral. Comments poured in. Death threats, accusations, former colleagues severed ties, sponsors pulled funding. And then came the strangest part. Listeners reported hearing whispers in the background of the episode. Different whispers. Personalized. Some claimed the whispers mentioned their names. Others said they heard confessions about their own darkest secrets, things they'd never said aloud. A mass panic followed. 3 listeners took their lives within a week, leaving cryptic notes mentioning the mirror or the basement. Authorities shut down Elias's channel, but the audio kept spreading. Mirrors of the file appearing on random forums, hidden sites, even on Spotify under fake artist names. Elias disappeared shortly after. His last known sighting was in a security video at a Romanian border crossing. He was barefoot, muttering to himself, clutching a broken shard of mirror in one hand. 6 months later, a podcaster named Lena Cruz stumbled across the story and traveled to Vorthen, hoping to uncover the truth. She found the house, empty, except for a recorder lying in the basement, still warm to the touch. She picked it up. It began playing on its own. "We remember your voice, Lena," it whispered. Then silence. Lena turned to leave, but the stairs were gone. There's a cabin deep in the Appalachian woods that never shows up on maps. No coordinates, no trail markers, just thick trees and stories whispered by locals who dare not venture too far off the beaten path. They call it the Hollow Cabin. It's said to appear only to those who are meant to find it, and who are never meant to leave. Mason Thorne was a wilderness survival YouTuber who prided himself on finding the most obscure and treacherous places to film content. He thrived on isolation and the eerie quiet of untouched nature. When he stumbled upon a forum post from 2012 describing a hidden cabin near Bent Hollow, a long-abandoned mining settlement, he knew he'd struck gold. The post had only one reply. "Don't follow the sound. It's not calling you, it's warning you." He laughed it off as typical internet folklore. Equipped with a GoPro, drone, and survival gear, Mason hiked deep into the forest, leaving behind the main trail after a few hours. Birdsong faded, replaced by a kind of muffled pressure in the air. Trees grew gnarled and close, and despite the time of day, the forest floor darkened unnaturally. After nearly 7 hours, he found it. The cabin was half swallowed by ivy and rot, yet eerily intact. Wooden steps creaked but held his weight. The door opened without resistance, revealing a dusty interior, furniture undisturbed, dishes still on the table, and a single rocking chair moving gently. He set up camp inside. As night fell, the air inside thickened. His camera caught flickers, brief, shadowy movements just beyond the lens. The footage stuttered. Outside, there was no wind, yet the trees swayed as though something massive moved through them. Around midnight, Mason heard humming. It came from the forest, faint, lilting, like a woman's voice. He froze. The humming wasn't coming to the cabin. It was circling it. Then came the knock. Not on the door, on the window. He turned. Nothing there. Just darkness. He checked the footage. The camera had caught something, a blur of black, hunched, long-limbed crawling along the ceiling outside. Its face was pressed against the glass for just one frame. No eyes, just a wide, stitched mouth. He decided to leave at first light. But the forest had changed. The path he came from was gone. Trees replaced it like they had grown overnight. His GPS spun in circles. The sun didn't seem to move. Hours passed. He looped back to the cabin 4 times without trying. And then it started raining. Not water, ashes. Black flakes falling from a clear sky. When he touched one, it burned his skin. By the second night, Mason's voice recorder began picking up audio that wasn't there before. Voices whispering in a language he couldn't place. In some clips, he could hear himself screaming, though he had no memory of it. He stopped sleeping. Every time he blinked too long, he'd see something. People standing in the woods. Their faces blurred, bodies flickering like old film, mouths wide open but emitting no sound. They never moved, just watched. And then the dream started. He dreamed of being inside the cabin, sitting at the table while a woman in a veil poured tea. Around them, the walls bled, not red but black, thick, like oil. The woman would lift her veil, but before he could see her face, he'd wake up choking on soil, actual dirt in his mouth. By day 4, Mason tried setting a fire to attract help. The smoke rose in perfect spirals, then curved downward and vanished into the chimney of the cabin, as though inhaled. That night, something entered the cabin. The door never opened. The windows remained closed. But Mason awoke to find muddy footprints on the ceiling. They circled above his bed like someone had been walking upside down. On the 5th day, he found a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It belonged to someone named Avery Whitlock, dated 1894. The entries grew more frantic. It follows me even in my sleep. The humming is louder. It's inside me now. They were never people. They wear the skin. Don't answer if it knocks thrice. Mason read this right as the first knock echoed through the cabin. He froze. Then a second knock. He clutched his knife, hand trembling. The third knock never came. Instead, a voice behind him whispered, "You already let it in." He turned. No one there. But his camera was recording. The footage showed him staring at something, smiling, glassy-eyed, while a dark, spidery figure loomed directly behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He had no memory of this. On day 6, he no longer recognized his own reflection. His eyes were pitch black in photos. His voice, when played back, echoed even in short clips. His hands were covered in scratches he couldn't explain. And every time he blinked, the cabin seemed bigger. By the 7th day, he was muttering to himself on camera, "I know now, it's not the cabin that's haunted. It's the forest that feeds it. The ones it chooses, it wears them." Then his voice changed, deepened. He looked into the lens and smiled. "Tell them they're all welcome." 3 weeks later, a group of amateur ghost hunters found the cabin after hearing about Mason's disappearance. The place was empty, but Mason's camera was still there, battery full, somehow still recording. The last shot, Mason in the rocking chair, smiling. And just before the footage cuts out, a voice whispers, "Next."